So we start with his paper titled From Language to Technology, Marcel, Broodthaers and some Lewitts, Materialist Conceptualism. Professor Egenhofer is professor of contemporary art history in the Department of Art History at the University of Vienna, and his focus of his investigation of his research is contemporary art and philosophy and theory and history of art of the 19th and 20th century. His most important book is Abstraktion, Kapitalismus, Subjektivität, die Wahrheitsfunktion des Werkes in der Moderne. So we can start.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for inviting me, and my sincere apologies for not being with. It was just a stupid mistake on my part that I missed my plane. I start immediately with my lecture. In a certain optimistic view of North American conceptual art, it was framed as a consequence of the use of industrial material production techniques by minimalist artists of the 1960s like Donald Judd. Since the artist conceived, next slide please. Since the artist, do you hear me? Next slide please. Do you have the paper? You see in the paper when you put. Since the artist conceives the work beforehand and delegates the production or just buys and assembles prefabricated materials, one could think that the execution becomes, as Sol Lewitts famously said in 1967, a perfunctory affair. A consequence was in the works of Lawrence Wiener, for example, the replacement of the material product as such by a linguistic definition that could easily be materialized by the artist or anyone else. The appeal of this new approach for a generation of artists engaged in the New Left and the anti-war movement of the 60s was, of course, the idea of getting rid of the commodity status of art, of the artworks with a big A and with armed guards at its side. Democratic and free distribution seemed possible, since even the non-realization of the artist's ID by the receiver, as Wiener puts it, was consistent with the artist's intention. It was, however, quickly established that the receivers of the artist's ideas remained buyers, acquiring now a certificate and, as Alex Albero has framed it in his book about the gallerist Seth Diegellaub and his artists, acquiring the publicity or prestige value of owning an often still so-called piece. I don't want to follow this commercial development of conceptual art. I want to look instead at some of its preconditions. It is not only a shared language that allows the distribution of an artistic idea. It is not only the graph paper and the shared measuring unit of artist and receiver. The efficient communication of the artist's concept of a work is a whole set of reliable normed materials and procedures. Wiener's standard aerosol can is a harmless example, but in Donald Judd's work, a whole bunch of, here should be the Donald Judd box again, but it doesn't matter, just leave it away. Donald Judd's work, in Donald Judd's work, a whole bunch of industrial techniques was involved. It related his apparently only self-referential objects to the then so much discussed military-industrial complex, as Robert Smithson made manifest by overfilling a text about Judd with all these resonating company names, Bethlehem Steel, Rome Haas, Plexiglas, etc. I'm sorry. Language, one back, please. Like that, thanks. Language as an historically sedimented structure that enables and enchains communication doesn't exist in a pristine space of linguistic competence, but is deeply embedded in the economic, political, and technical matrix of a given society. Today, our social behavior is canalized and structured by machines, on the surfaces of which the screens, language, and images have been coalesced into a new kind of continuum, a live stream, disguising those sedimented or frozen structures that support its flow. Artworks today seem to be inevitably carried away by this flow. In the following, I'll ask if artworks under these conditions can still highlight the materiality of these frozen support structures. I will do this via a reflection on the function of language in Marcel Broodthaers' work, and via some side glances on the work of the New York-based artist Sam Lewitts. Let me start with an image taken from Friedrich Kittler's gramophone film typewriter. It's the woodcut of a printing workshop where skeletons guide the hands of the human typesetters. The dead are writing, speechless, by tactile coordination of living labor. I will try to explore the relation of the continuous and the distinct that's emblematized here. The continuous, that is living speech, but it was also writing with the hand, it was the line and its temporality. The distinct is the letterpress printing. I see the skeletons as hints to the machines involved in the new writing process. The hint to the substance of these machines, which is dead or frozen labor. But why are the machines inimical to handwriting and can't produce a continuous but significantly articulated trace? It is because the task of the machines has to be segmented to make them efficient. The letters have to be produced separately in different numbers and sizes. And the printing machine itself is dependent on a regular articulation of the space of the page, line by line, letter by letter, blank by blank. This implies, of course, a deepening division of the living labor that remains involved in the process of writing. But this is only a consequence of the grounding of the new way of the production of writing in the dead labor that is crystallized in the material elements and the regulated procedures of the printing press. Implied in this tactile dictation of human labor by the machine is in the long run the perspective of the computerization and automatization of production, which loses more and more of its dependency on living labor at all. This is the subject of one half of one of Sam Lewitts' so-called paper citizens. This group of work, the paper citizens, consists of strongly edited digital collages, of high-definition photographs of discarded print equipment from a print shop in New York that exchanged them only recently against the computer-based printing techniques, like those used for the actual production of the work we see. The writing to which this equipment is arranged is, of course, mirror reversed. The right side reads, the right side, manufacturing plant supervision service tasks. Automations must be able to learn from their experience and become more adaptive and communicative. The loop between the automation's perceptions and actions must narrow on several levels of abstraction. The development of signal-to-symbol systems is integral to these challenges. The subject, here's the text I want to make you experience how difficult it is to read. The subject of this condensed text are the conditions of the use of computerized machines, automations, in the real-world situations of their future workplace. The source, in this case, it was easy to find, is a paper about machine learning techniques from 1995. It makes clear that areas of labor that are going to be replaced by automations, or plainly by robots, are those two mentioned in the first lines: manufacturing, plant supervision, and service tasks, the last in the domain, for example, of healthcare. Human jobs in these areas of security and healthcare will be taken over by machines, by learning, environment-sensitive, self-adapting robots. The ability to learn implies a feedback structure between input, signal, output, the movement, which is embedded in the signal-to-symbol system of the software. The development and strengthening of these systems and the narrowing of the loop between the robot's experiences or perceptions, as the original paper puts it, signals, and its symbolically mediated actions will allow the use of the machines in contingency of real-world situations outside the laboratories. The other half of Lewitts' paper Citizen is about Egyptian priests that employed primitive steam engine to make their gods open their eyes and breathe steam, of course. Since the priests couldn't make their statues actually speak, they at least made their potential to speak publicly visible, implying that secretly the gods would speak to them, priests, who would write down what they heard as the texts of sacred law. The skeletons of the dead letters and the liveliness or fake liveliness of the steam remain two related threads of my talk. I jump now to Marcel Broodthaers and his industrial poems, as he called this type of plastic shields with an imprinted relief of graphic signs and letters. I propose to loosely organize these works in three groups. Some of them relate directly to Broodthaers' museum fiction. A second group thematizes contemporary artistic practices, the new academy of late modernist and minimalist art, cubes, spheres, cylinders, etc., that one could see, for example, abundantly at the Documenta 4 in 1968, the year of Broodthaers' museum's founding, and of so many other events, of course. A third group deals with the interference of different sign systems, or to be more concrete, of image, speech, and writing. You see that the pipe connects the last two categories. Here in the center, it is set between the silent and abstract forms of the late modernist academy, and there on the right, it exhales not smoke or steam, but a dancing comma, as we find them also in the poem at the left, Museum Enfant Monadie. Apparently, there should be not too much life in the museum's sacrosanct halls. All three groups share, of course, the concern with sign systems. The museum is a sign system too. The middle group, art's relation to exchange value, the basic sign system of the market economy, and more precisely deals with the relation to exchange value of visual art on the one hand and of writing or poetry on the other. In Academy 1, the reflection of the cubes, spheres, and pyramids' relation to the laws of the sea, the law of equivalence, to put it bluntly, is interwoven with a meditation about the revocation of visibility, about a self-imposed blindness, and an ocean of ink. The work, especially in its black versions, relates to a poem by Charles Baudelaire, Le Voyage, the final poem of the Fleur du Mal, a voyage not to the North Sea, but into the night of death and forgetfulness, an ocean black as ink. The problem of the sign, next one please. The problem of the sign, the problem of language and of writing is never absent from these sheets. But I'll have a closer look mainly at one of them, the one that is titled, or titles itself, Rue René Magritte. There are two shields and three layers. There's the street sign in French, Flemish, there's the cloud of steam or smoke, and there's the grid, the brick wall in black. I won't explore the relation of the large enclosing sign, shield itself, with smaller double street sign. I'm interested in the steam or smoke, in the letters and bricks. The bricks hint to an age-old technology of construction and of the rasterization of metal. The brick wall emblematizes the erection of rational laws within the physical world. The grid of the wall implies the social and technical conditions of the production of bricks or blocks of stone, if you think of Egypt. And it implies the knowledge and technical mastering of the laws of statics and material properties like density and weight. The brick wall is an emblem of the close connection between rationality, segmentation, and repetition as means of an effective integration of rationality in the contingency of the material world. Power techniques, one could also say. The smoke is breath made visible, forming not yet speech, not even an isolated comma, but rather, if anything, a face in profile with a very thick nose and very thick lips and short hair. The street sign uses the white of the smoke as contrasting background for the red letters of the name René Magritte. I won't delve into Magritte, but the name, of course, reminds us that the smoke doesn't come out of some Egyptian god's mouth, but out of René Magritte's highly contestable pipe. The pipe is missing here, between the brick wall, the face of the smoke, the writing of the streets. It is missing from this structure that it could, it seems to me, have actively articulated. For what is a pipe? It's a device to make and form smoke. It is a device to make living breath, substance of acoustic speech visible, to make it plastic. I will show the missing pipe in a moment in the film called La Pipe Satire, but as an introduction I will play a short segment of the related interview with Cat, recorded in the Section de Cinéma of Broodthaers Museum in Burgplatz 12, Düsseldorf in 1970. Bon, next, please. I hope we have the sound file. Next slide, please. It should be the sound file.
Ceci est une pipe. Ceci
Does it start? Do you hear the meow of the cat?
Est-ce que c'est un bon tableau?
If not, I tell you, Broodthaers asked the cat, ceci est une pipe. And the cat answers with a meow. And he repeats, ceci n'est pas une pipe. And the cat answers meow. And it goes on and on in different languages. Well, then we look at the film. Next one, please.
Ceci n'est pas une pipe. Ceci est une pipe.
What the interview shows with the cat is that the meowing of the cat is not able to negate anything or to affirm anything. It's unarticulated sound without grammar, in contradistinction to what Broodthaers says. So, we should see a film now. La Pipe Satie, if you don't verify, I show you only the stills.
Là, qui correspond à ce que vous attendez de cette transformation toute récente qui va du conceptual art à cette nouvelle version d'une certaine figuration, pourrait-on dire.
Leave the interview away. It's no problem. Just show the film first. It's in the presentation.
Ceci n'est pas une pipe.
It's just the next slide is a film. This is a film. Perhaps one has to press again that it's dark. But oh, I'm sorry. If you just press once again the the PowerPoint is crashed. Yeah, the film is. I think one just has to press when the slide of the film appears. One to press once an empty space. Also in. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry for the delay. Still, I would like to make you look at the film. I think it's not running. Ah, yeah, it is. How should this film relate to the polarity of dead and living labor, to the skeleton, the printing workshop, replace handwriting, and to the robots, the computerized skeletons of today, will replace millions of human jobs in the next decades? This is obviously difficult to answer, but obviously the film addresses the relation of the distinct and continuous that I connected with the polarity of dead and living labor at the beginning of my talk. The continuous, you can go to the next slide. The continuous is obviously the smoke, but before being the smoke, it is the white coloring over the grid of the brick wall in the back. Continuous is also the film images itself, the analogous photographic space with its lights, shadows. Not really continuous is the time since the film densely cut, edited. But there's no writing within the film, no filmed letters in the photographic space, and no subtitles imprinted on the celluloid of the film strip, as in so many other films by Broodthaers. The pipe has to introduce the discontinuity on the semantic level. It does so by disappearing from where it should be and appearing where it is supposed not to be. The pipe acts as a satirical phallus, disarticulating sexual difference. But it acts also, next please, complemented by the silent accordion with its keyboard as a device to form smoke. It acts as a kind of surrogate mouse before it is the last phase of the film arrested, or probably in a loop of only a couple of repeated film seconds, and is thus transformed into the graphic sign itself as the comma. Next, please. It exhales in the shield I showed at the beginning. But still we have to accept that the film is at best a visual allegory about the production of language. The pipe is not enough to make air into speech. It can only make it into form, a cloud or a face. And such a form still lacks the organization of the grid. It lacks articulation, like the mewing of the cat. Whereas language, if you take this basic Saussurian insight for granted, language is based on differential articulation. Next, please. The layer of the signifier, as well as of the signified, phonic or acoustic substance, and the totality of possible meanings, are articulated in one and the same movement to build the system of language whose units are not positively defined by what they are and contain, but by the totality of all the other units of the same system from which they differentiate themselves. The differential system of language can be seen as foundational for all other articulations or rasterizations, by means of which rationality is integrated with material support. The steam or smoke of acoustic substance, the mew of the cat, has to pass through the grid of differential articulation to become the carrier of the coextensive and congruently articulated field of possible meanings and the socially inhabitable world. This implies that the system of language is beyond the reach of any individual voluntaristic act. As a collective product of society, in deep historical time, the system is the cage from which human thought and experience cannot escape. These are characteristics of language that led Jacques Lacan to associate the symbolic, as he names it, with the machine, the dice with the 26 sides, the alphabet, and its combinatory play is the automaton that makes anyone speak, write, and compete at the same time. The steam or smoke of animated speech, the acoustic or phonetic matter, will have been grinded by these machines and enters but at the other side, in the universe of sense. In one of Broodthaers' shields, this relation of the articulating machine and of continuous sensible matter is inscribed as the self-reflection of the medium of the shield itself. Je suis fait pour enregistrer les idiots. It seems that the white plastic itself is speaking in the first line. I made to register signals. Then the perspective changes and the writing, already imprinted plastic speaks. Je suis un signal. Je. I'm a... And this is followed in the third line by the repetition of the words objet, métal, esprit. They form also 6 columns in the lower third of the shield under the telephone sign. The words relate to the transformation of the telephone itself from a silent, skull-like object, here in an early verb wrapped in damping cotton wool, not into the screen of the white plastic. This status of the phone as that object relates to the plastic itself, that nonetheless begins to speak in the first line, I am made to register signals. Then one could say the phone rings with its metallic sound, cries, I am a signal, je. And then someone takes the phone, that object is finally transformed into the gem of a spiritual meaning. Though it has no clearly corresponding line in the text of the shield, this third step is not realistic since it resides in our act of reading. Reading, however, doesn't seem able to piece through the self-declaring opacity of the medium. The speaking subject on the other end of the line, our reading itself, are falling back in the medium's self-materializing, or materiality, one could say. When we add one of the sources of telephone, an open letter from 1968, next please, we see that the columns objet, métal, esprit can as well relate to the typewriter that produced them in the first place, a collection of letters and paper. I hope I'm at least getting closer to an interpretation of the fields, of the shields and the film's structure. In the film, it seems to be the erring phallic pipe jumping in and out of visibility. In the shield, the stark grid of the brick wall, the writing itself, and the triple-layered structure that inscribe the discontinuity into the verb structure. This discontinuity is not only connected to the grid of language, but to the automaton, the typewriter, and the strata of technical media, which allow to register and recast and disrupt the continuum of living time. To clarify this temporality further, I will have a look at the shield's relation to Broodthaers' conception of memory and the archive as it is articulated in some of his other works. The shields are done in vacuum print technique. They are double layered, or if we count the color as we should, since it can heighten or conceal the structure of the relief, or both, they're triple layered. Pavel, can I continue? How is the time? How is your schedule? Yeah, because I will be, as you see, it will be a bit longer. Is it okay? Okay, then I just finish reading and we cut a bit of the discussion if necessary. They rely, these shields, these triple-layered shields, rely on the model of the Freudian Wunderblock. Next, please. Where behind the visible surface, behind the ephemeral, but formally stable present consciousness, lies the sediment of memory represented by the palimpsest of permanent traces in the stratum of wax, in which former inscriptions remain as a, calls it Dauerspur, permanent trace. So the printing of the shields from the back is analog to the act of remembering Freud's account. A trace in the wax reappears in the surface of consciousness. In Broodthaers' work, this space of memory is associated with language, writing, and with poetry, in contrast to the plastic visual arts. As many of you will know, Broodthaers was a writer, a poet, and journalist before starting a late artistic career by turning unsold copies of his last book, poetry, Ponce Bête, into a sculpture. Gestures of an effacement of language, of its burial under spatial form, show up repeatedly in his work. The Mallarmé adaptation, next please. Un coup de dé image covering Mallarmé's writing, next please, and black stripes. Or again, Académie 1 are examples of this. The polarity between the continuous and the distinct is articulated as the relation between the layer of the visual present, of image, the plastic art, that are bound to the commodity form and float in the forgetful ocean of exchange value. Next. A cube, a sphere, a pyramid, following the laws of the sphere. Next go. And the other side, the side of the distinct, is the techniques of writing, encoding the sequential time of speech and lived experience. So the continuous is the side of the image in Broodthaers' work of the plastic arts, and the discontinuous the side of writing. Language writing structure is not always ironically hidden or half hidden in Broodthaers' work. It's finally this. With his museum, he lays hold on this dimension and its framing devices, first from the ritual of the opening speech to... Yes? Yes. Yeah, perhaps I could jump to the end. I'm sorry for with the film. It was yeah, it's my too many problems. Yeah, I'm sorry. Let's jump a bit forward to the through the slides, and I say stop. These were quick slides. I didn't have talked long about it. Yes, further. Here, let's stop here. 10. I read the end. Go a bit further still. One further. To end, not to conclude, I'll come back to the topic outlined at the beginning. The artistic idea that classical conceptual art tried to convey via the grid of language and of the graph paper, supported by technical media such as the photograph, is today floating in this live stream of data that disguises its rows of support structures more efficiently than ever. What I want to ask, next please, with regard to the works of Broodthaers and of Sam Lewitts, is if art today can find a way to articulate this structure of the flow of data, or for Broodthaers, it was perhaps the flow of commodities, of visual commodities in this medium of exhibition and exchange value. For artists today, it's the flow of information and of images in the flow of digitalized world. If art can still articulate the relation of these two layers of an ephemeral present to its frozen, sedimented, machinized support structures. And I want to show you some works of Sam Lewitts again. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. Next, please. Next, next, please. This one. Sam Lewitts articulates perhaps or tries to articulate its relation to the support structures of digital flow, the flow of digital data, by focusing directly on the hardware of, I'm speaking freely, it's not written, so you don't have to look at it. He's trying to focus on the hardware of the digital data. Here, for example, he poured some bottles of so-called ferroliquid that is built into machines like smartphones and cameras. It's one of the, it's basically included in all our electronic devices and make the functioning possible. On the floor of the Whitney Museum, where it coalesces and stagnates. And in the next type of work that I want to show, please I finish, please. This was an exhibition of materials that are usually also built in electronic devices to stabilize the heat there. And he used these much enlarged plugged in the electricity system, the lighting system of several institutions, several art institutions like the Kunsthalle Basel in this case. And they used up all the electricity that was surveyed for usually to produce light and to produce heat. Next, please. So here you see how it was presented on the internet, not as a series of free-floating photographs, but as a film live stream of a thermocamera that showed this inefficient and production of heat that in a way interrupts the usual procedure of an exhibition space to show objects and to produce images of them in natural light. So I think this is perhaps a trial to articulate interruption of flow of information in the flow of digital data. Sorry for being too long with the technical problems, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. If you can stay for a while with us, we can organize a discussion if anybody want to put a question. But if you want to put a question, you must go to the computer.
Oh, that's terrible.
So, do you have any questions? I don't see. So thank you very much for
I'm
the
so
connection.
sorry for being with you, and wish you a very successful first conference.
Well, thank you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. We continue now. The second speaker is Wiktoria Kozioł, who attended psychology and art history in Cracow, and she's candidate at the PhD candidate at the Jagiellonian University. Has been writing a dissertation about Polish art after 1989 in concern of political, social, and economic turn. And now she will be speaking about other subject, about the exhibition of modern art in 1948 in Krakow. So, please.
Okay. Can you hear me properly? Is the okay. Because my presentation is not visible. Is the volume okay now, or am I too loud? Okay. As you can see, the title of my presentation right now. I would like to talk about the exhibit of modern art, also known afterwards as the first exhibit of modern art, which has been preposterously interpreted as an example of political naivety of a generation of young artists who started their professional career after the Second World War. So the exhibition held place in 1938. They had believed that the communist authorities would have left them a freedom of creation in various stylistics, full range of dimensions from abstract to figurative art. Artists who exhibited their works hopes that the display would have been regarded as a brave and honest manifestation and would have convinced the audience of usability of modern art. The exhibit's opening took place on the 18th of December 1938. The authors didn't realize that the political decisions had already been taken. However, a first sign of disapproval was a warrant of destruction of nearly all the printed catalogues. So there are only a few numbers of the catalogues left. The show would have been closed a few weeks before the planned date if an important politician had not come to visit partly removed display. The closing took place on the 19th of January 1939. In February, a conference with an artist, there was a conference with an artist to discuss attitude towards socialist realism. And it became the only accepted way of artist expression in June. The exhibit of modern art was the biggest show of contemporary art after the war. 37 artists from many centers presented 127 paintings and a vast number of drawings, watercolors, gouaches, decalcomanias, pastels, graphic works, and spatial constructions, model of forms. The reception. In the 70s, properly to modernist thinking about art, attention was paid to avant-garde elements of the narration, with an exclusion of a hidden expression of a Second World War trauma, which was simply regarded as trivial or old-fashioned. The authors saw the exhibitions as a proof that Polish art was not always retarded in comparison to Western art. It was a narration about the center and peripheral region that had to adjust to the mainstreams of art, especially to Paris. Unfortunately, the attention was focused rather on traditional medium, mainly oil paintings, and secondly, as far as we know, the elaborations of researchers are only short synthesis. So it's now difficult to ascertain what elements of the works were seen as avant-garde, except of some general observation that the exhibition had showed three general tendencies. Geometrical post-constructivism stream, then some first reception, probably one of the first receptions of surrealism and so-called metaphorical art, and some new conception of realism. However, as I try to suggest, the period was not only a time devoted to analyze modernist divagations about, but it was also, let's say, discourse about the matter, understood as a formal term, but also the problem of matter depicted as in the visual art with all the philosophical background. I suggest that it would be also one of the narration of the exhibition, but it was simply overlooked. Most of all, the signs of an interest in science could be seen as an inspiration for a new attitude towards matter in visual art. Of course, it's not a new sign, and we could see it and perceive it in the 20s and the 30s, but now it would be, of course, the different incarnation of this fascination, especially in physics, astronomy, biology, and techniques. Moreover, the perception of science would affect in different formal solutions than, of course, in between the 2 years' time. The preserved examples of the catalogue are small brochures. In this brochure, the officer of the exhibition, let's say today curator Mieczysław Poremski, explained, for a modern artist, art is a method of notional assimilation of the world himself. The four horizons of modern art, science and techniques are common. Photograms placed in the entry room show the world, which is at the same degree the world of an artist, as well as the world of scholar, researcher, and a practitioner, a technician. The description concerns the arrangement of a first room, often called the room with photocollages, which the viewer saw after going through the lobby. It contained 7 works of Zbigniew Dłubak. How can I change the slides? Did I forget to do something? Because the arrows didn't work properly. Okay. So the room contains 7 works of Zbigniew Dłubak, which the viewer saw after going through the lobby. Asymmetry duplicated macrophotographies of an X-ray image of lungs, a section of a head of a cabbage, one of the photos showing the structure of leaves in it, an iron construction and nebula, an interstellar cloud of dust, and is inside of a hand clock showing the mechanism, and a maple seed, and the blade of the mouse. The problem, of course, is, as I said, that there was no attention paid to the works, and they simply disappeared after the exhibition, and we only know some relations in the photographics. But I would like not to concentrate on the strictly visual analysis, but let's say try to understand the attitude towards materiality in connection to science. The differences of scale, a huge approximation that allows the viewers to analyze the structure of object, is ambivalent. It can possibly create a narration of a conception of truth, coming closer, knowing more. But it could be also interpreted as a bizarre effect. The defragmented, partly shown object could be sometimes difficult to recognize. That treatment creates a feeling of strangeness toward objects. That was the primary attention of the author, covered in this scientific descriptions of an exhibition. And it's more visible on other works which were also presented, but in the small different room, which fortunately are still to be seen. Which are also macro photographies of some structures which we could not identify. This macro photographies comes from a series called Magellan Heart, which refers to the poem of Pablo Neruda. But it shows unrecognizable objects that resemble organic structures or simply some undefined matter, amorphic plastic, as if it was a primer undefined matter. The cycle refers to the poem of Pablo Neruda, generally speaking, with an pessimistic undertone and existential meaning. And Dłubak also admitted that it was connected with his traumatic experience during the Second World War, so the feeling of a strangeness of the object. As the exhibit had a very visible didactic function, there were guided tours for laborers organized. In the speech prepared for the special group of audience, another artist, Andrzej Wróblewski, wrote, "The world became very complicated. We know that human has an enormous power, thanks to the works of his mind and his hands, At the same time, we know all human bones and organs. We can decompose him in our imagination into pieces, like a watch. We know more, that an object is considered of atoms, in which matter concentrates so rare as planets in the universe. And even as physics tell us, that the matter is a certain form of energy. Astronomers amaze us with the star distances and scare us with the possibility of a catastrophe. This interpretation, though they are referring to another part of the exhibitions, of course, this one, shed some light on the artist's own project. In 1938, he created astronomic series. And there is one on the picture called The Sun and Other Planets, and it was presented in the main central hall where all the oil paintings were placed. Aesthetic in the composition situated somewhere between abstraction and representational art. In the show at the exhibition Sun and Other Stars, as well as the other cosmic works of the authors, operate on simple structures, circles and spheres. He creates closed system of defined structures with an aggregation of solids and figures outside the edges of the composition, which becomes only a flat background. He decided to forego the harmony of the configurations, which becomes only a he recollects, as Marcin Lachowski remarked, the balance point of the composition out of the excess of a symmetry. So in The Sun and Other Stars, it is relocated to the right down edge of the painting. First of all, Wróblewski, in the mentioned part of the text, depicted the analogy between micro and macro world. Atoms are juxtaposed with the planets and stars. This is somehow anachronic in this time because it's usually rather an old model of atom proposed by Niels Bohr in 1913. After discovering the principle of uncertainty by Werner, of course, I mean Heisenberg. In 1927, it would be impossible to show electrons as, sorry for my pronunciation, I choked. To show electrons as satellites, it would be impossible because it would be impossible to locate them in one position. As Wróblewski might have had some knowledge about the differences between quantum and classical physics, as I will explain further. As I will show later, the officer of the exhibition had a quite wide knowledge about the physics in the 30s, but many popularizers of science in the 40s show similarities between space system and atomic principles. For instance, in this time it became clear that planets emit nuclear radiation in the same way as atoms in the process of nuclear reactions. That was a very popular theme due to the case of atom bombing in the 30s. Huge space or vacuum between planet or nuclei and the electrons may be the inspiration of this formal solution. Concentrations on the tension between solids and empty flat circles, representation of vacuum or nothingness. Here we can see the two gouaches which are untitled and were also created in 1938. And one of those pictures from this year, which is called The Town and the Afternoon. Marta Leśniakowska and Lech Lachowski interpreted astronomic paintings as a metaphor of creation of a new world, especially the mosaic structures. There is also, unfortunately, I don't have here the picture, but of a painting called Earth, but it's simply it's very similar to the, let's say, the sphere, which is on the down at the down edge. It's called the Earth. Especially the mosaic structures, they seem to be a building material, which, let's say, closes the final effect of a process. We can also read it as some process of an emanation of an energy and consisting of a new world. The creation of a special planet or the Earth with, for instance, some flat spaces or the project which don't come to the end. Heisenberg, after let's say discovering that it is not possible to locate the electron, he formed following thought. I had a feeling that I look only on the surface of atomic issues, but when I discovered the truth, I felt the lying underneath it, inside, some hidden matter of inside beauty. It was also observed that the matter appears spontaneously in vacuum and then disappeared. So the process is very quick, but it is, let's say, something extraordinary and against the laws of classical physics. Out of nothingness for a very short while. That also was a suggestion or a theory of Heisenberg that happens on the micro level of quantum physics. The matter appears and disappears in spatial condition. That would be a very hypothetical cause of the creation of the worlds, let's say. The empty circles on Wróblewski's paintings could represent non-matter. In the connections to figurative art, Wróblewski very often recollects the topics of trauma, of dead bodies, and it is interesting to, let's say, think about some connections, associations, and visual metaphors in the mediations of Jean-Luc Nancy when he meditated on corpus. He compares dead body to a black hole where there is nothingness and we can't communicate with the matter inside or the space which is inside. It seems like a hole, but paradoxically it is very compressed matter. But Wróblewski could not have known the notion of black hole because it became popular in the 60s. But possibly he may have had a concept of a dead star. But Wróblewski, in his speech for laborers, warned them that science in bad hands can cause catastrophes. What did he mention? Probably, of course, the modern trauma of mass murder in the Holocaust, but the memory of the usage of an atom bomb was also vivid in the 30s. At the first sight, the representation of is not connected with nowadays with the bombing of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but the discourse about atom bombing after 1935 was much different. The first article that appeared in Poland in Polish diary claimed enthusiastically, the greatest triumph of science. The explosion was seen as unavoidable, necessary, was compared to natural disasters. Martin Heidegger, for instance, claimed that the atom bomb was the greatest invention of humankind, and that humankind finally succeed in finding a way of extracting energy hidden in nature. It was seen as a sacrifice, of course, of some victims, but to save the humankind. It is worth to notice that there were no photographs depicting the situation after the explosion, due to, of course, firstly, due to the biological and physical conditions, it would be impossible to create a representation of the explosion. First of all, because nobody would survive it, and secondly, because it is hypothetically described as a very bright light and a destructive wave of energy. In the painting stars, the sun and other stars, the emanation of energy, let's say on in the upper edge of the painting, could be depicted as a mosaic. Of course, let's say the energy which is emanated could be after then changed into the planet. But it could be seen the first as an emanation of energy, beams of light, or radiuses of energy. In this capture, it would be worth to mention that the first painting, which was visible for the visitors, was placed in the lobby, was monumental Wróblewski's work, The Emotional Content of a Revolution. In this time, Wróblewski believed in an objective possibility to communicate with use of visual patterns. So the emotional content didn't mean subjective to him. Revolution is depicted as an atomic or a cosmic process. It's a structure with a missing part. This manipulation naturalized revolution as a natural, biological, or physical process that is unavoidable, and it's a necessity of a history. In this condition of an atom bomb explosion, revolution annihilates an old system and needs victims to rescue the humankind, of course, secondly. The pattern is built out of old matter. The question, of course, its interpretation is entitled, but looking Mieczysław Poremski, the officer of the exhibit, had, as I said, a wide knowledge about sciences. In his library, he already had the works of Henri Poincaré about, let's say, the paradigm of natural science, some manuals about geometry, logics, and cybernetics. Cybernetics, the books about cybernetics come from the 50s, but let's say, general manuals about physics are from the 30s and 40s. He had a work published in 1934 called Determinism in Natural Science by Joachim Mettelmann, Polish researcher. In his publication, the author explicitly explained the modern natural science processes and explains that there was not such thing as a strict determinism, only a synthetic determinism based on a probability, and exactly that noticed Poremski and placed in the description of the exhibition. But nowadays, determinism is only synthetic and probable. This evaluated positively an element of accident, even in rational reasoning. And in art, it gives, of course, a formal possibility to evaluate incident, even in the rational thinking, and if it's possible to notice it in the science. In the short note for the viewers, he mentioned that physics was developing very quickly, and that general relativity theory of Albert Einstein caused the appreciation of space as a very important element of physical reality and art. This shortly reference to the last room of the exhibition with the spatial object. But yeah, I would only vaguely speak about them because many of them are impossible to rebuild and to exactly know what the elements are. But these installations were primarily thought to be to show the idea of artistic features or artistic language. But this language was also the language of physics. So every spatial model was to depict one feature, of physical feature: matter, space, color, and move. Every model was to present one of this characteristics of object. Poremski wrote about another landmark of physics. Speculations concerned the quantum physics. I suggest that it was in those times, this controversy connected with a concept about the controversy were strictly, let's say, focused on a concept about the dual nature of matter, corpuscular and waving, on the level of molecular physics. In common knowledge, we generally know about the corpuscular and waving nature of light, but not about the whole matter. The hypothesis was formed by Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg in 1927, and it is known as an idea of Copenhagen school. It was partly proved by Ernst Ruska and Mark Knoll, which invented the electron microscope in the 40s, but they, let's say, improved it in the 50s, and it was possible to observe particles smaller than atoms. Firstly, they had been disappointed because they observed a wave. They thought that it had been a wave of light, but it appeared to be an electron seen as a wave. But the problem, as I said, generally this exhibition was not well seen by the authorities. And USSR in the 30s, it was a forbidden topic. I mean, the wave nature of matter, because, of course, of the very flat understanding of the conception of dialectical materialism. Simply the politicians and some of the, let's say, secondary scholars concluded that there could be only one nature or only true nature of matter. As I mentioned, and of course it would be the corpuscular nature of the matter. As I mentioned, the exhibition was not well accepted, and touching the themes of physics and matter might have been simply dangerous in those times, and there were written relations that showed that the circle of the artists connected with the first exhibit of modern art were aware of these political changes, also in the science. For instance, writer Kolner Filipowicz, when he recollects the exhibition and its context, he wrote also in the same context about the bans in science, especially in biology, which he was interested in USSR. But it is, but of course, it is speculations if they were conscious, probably later after the exhibition, of this, let's say, the changing of the attitudes. But Einstein was one of the few scientists who was a proponent of monogenic corpuscular nature of matter. And that was the reason of the popularity of him as a, let's say, researcher in the Stalinist Poland. And Poremski had his book written with Polish physics, the evolution of physics. And one of the artists who created the spatial model, which is not well seen here, but the net with balls, which was, let's say, very vivid and moved quickly if somebody touched the nets. Marian Bogusz, he also creates a portrait of Einstein in 1955, which with some abstract geometrical structures on it, and it would be not possible, let's say, before 1956 to use some kind of abstractions, not trying to, let's say, connect it with the authority of Albert Einstein. In the connection of Copenhagen idea, I would like to show another work presented at the exhibition. That's the main room where you can see. Unfortunately, I can't use the mouse. Here is the work, as I mentioned before, the air, and here the stamp and other stars of Wróblewski. And there also is another figurative work. Yes. That is the only of two reconstructions of the spatial models created by the artist I will talk about, Jadwiga Mazarska. Here is an artist, Zofia Wiktoria, who was in close relation in those times with Wróblewski also, and her, let's say, construction also may refer some particles. But I mentioned this work. Jadwiga Mazarska created a college which juxtaposed scientific records. I mean, let's say this records downside this kind of wave with natural waves or water. What is the record? The owner suggests that it might be an electrocardiogram, but it was a new form of examination which was not very popular in Poland in the 30s, and there were no strict procedures to do it simply. So besides, GP suggested that the person would have a very severe heart effect. The patterns of EKG are simply similar in every line. They should be rhythmic. I suppose that it's an electroencephalogram. That means, of course, that the million of neurons communicate in a chemical but also electrical way. It is possible to register the electric impulses of the skull on the surface. And generally, the work of Mazarska touches the problem of hidden pattern and hidden in the science, let's say, but also a psychophysical dilemma, the difference between living and non-living matter. And probably I suggest that it was the electroencephalogram because there were first attitudes to build it in Poland in 1937 and in 1938 successfully. So probably there were some photos in the newspapers which she simply cut out, but she also didn't know what it was. Or the reception is, let's say, non-authorized. The works of Mazarska also explores, in some different examples shown at the exhibitions, the aesthetics of ruin, the grey substance, primal matter, which is, of course, let's say, nearly an abstraction. That would refer to, as I said before, mosaics, which were used in the 40s, which were made out of rubble of destroyed buildings, which were everywhere in 1938 also. Moreover, Jadwiga Mazarska was the first representative of a painting of matter in Poland. She's also maybe her colleges have had many layers, and maybe that was a stimuli to create fleshly oil painting in the 50s afterwards, because she also used a fabric, let's say, and sew it together. And her first painting, matter painting, was created in 1935. I come to the conclusion. The fastening buckle of all the ideas is a constatation of a vision of a materiality in the younger generation of artists in the 30s. Poremski and Kantor, as well as Wróblewski, in their theoretical text, fought against depicting the superficial representation of objects. Wróblewski has seen, of course, it as a bourgeois naturalism, which gives a pleasure of watching simply the surface outside of the objects of people who want to, of course, have them for them. The concept of heightened realism of Poremski and Kantor simply suggests that modern art should depict natura naturata, the inner process of the words, and let's say they try to, and artists should try to recreate them and not, of course, show the artificial representation. And let's say it would be, the problem is, of course, a kind of a gap between this kind of thinking and the emergence of metal painting, which is further to be studied. Thank you for your attention. I hope that it was at least partly clear what I thought.
Thank you very much. We are catastrophically late, but if you have any question, yes, 2 questions.
This is on? Yeah, okay. I guess I'd like to try to ask a question which connects between the 2 talks. If Sebastian is still with us. Is Sebastian still there? No, he's not. Okay, well, then not. But then actually the question is probably more attuned to Wiktoria's talk, so thank you for that. Because you bring up, if I try to summarize a little bit for myself what you're talking about, I think one of the issues you're addressing, which I think is quite interesting and relates to the theme of dematerialization, which is the status of the model. The status of the model within art practice and in scientific practice. Because one of the shifts that takes place, I guess, which a lot of other critics also talk about, Flusser also later, this idea that information then creates a model, that's a model of the world, we don't need to represent the world anymore. And I think the model notion might be useful to excavate in relationship to this idea of dematerialization, because the model is not a metaphor. And it's a very unclear kind of representation at the same time. So this idea of the model emerges, as you say, there in the 50s with its reference to like mathematical models. But it's also very much on the mind of artists in the 1960s. And that's why it would have been nice to have Sebastian here, because Broodthaers also always talks about the model. I just don't know if we're talking about the same kind of model. So could you say more about the relation between our topic of dematerialization and this idea of the model?
Thank you. Maybe 2 questions together and the answer later.
I try my best to connect that in some way to the model, but it probably has something to do with scaling, at least, what I want to ask. You glossed a little bit about the actual setting of the exhibition, and looking at the shots of the actual display, I just want to ask you whether you can comment a little bit more about the experiential dimension, how we encounter these things actually in space, because they seem to me very different rooms. That one more like a communal area with tables, etc. And the first one that you showed us, especially, more like a maze, more like a labyrinth, where you really, where it's not so much apparently about a flow, about a transmission of sorts, but more about blockages and, barriers that are created. So how do these different rooms and techniques of display interrelate, if at all?
Okay. So the first question, yes, I think that, of course, the topic, for instance, in Poland was very vivid in the 60s and in the 70s. I simply pointed out to the 30s because it's not very common to think about it in the 30s, simply after the Second World War. But, of course, I suppose that the scientific interest also was also connected with the evolution of the Cold War and its representation, and maybe it was, I hope it was quite visible. I'm interested in, of course, some visual representation which is created through some special new techniques like the microscope, and this how it influences the art. I would suggest that, of course, the connection of materiality and immateriality in this art is quite complicated, of course, and not so easy, because it would like to grasp the matter itself as a matter and generally as a physical matter, but it shows also the emptiness or, let's say, the destructive possibilities of manipulating on this quantum level of the matter. So as if it, of course, consists of some kind of distraction itself inside. But yeah, I've been thinking of course, about reading. Reading is not a good, but interpreting objects using scientific methods, but not to use a metaphor, because it's quite simple. So how to show an object in a different way and avoid metaphor? Or is it simply possible or not? Because it's always a kind of a grammatization, of course, and the language representation. So I wonder how the model, of course, it has some connections to the structure of matter it shows, but it's, unfortunately, I would suppose, is still a kind of a metaphor. But it's interesting to think about the differences of it. And the second question is easier, a little bit easier for me. It held place, and so the whole exhibition had 5 different rooms. This room was placed in the center. Was the biggest one, and let's say all the paintings were rather traditionally hung on the wall, but asymmetrically. But some collages and the pictures were on such a prepared stellages, I mean chokes or wedges. But I suppose that this room was to be more a representation or an interpretation of surrealism. Of course, very not very deep one, because of let's say first very narrow connections with the first exhibition. For instance, that Dariusz Kantor saw in Paris. The chess. Don't agree. He has shown only, let's say, the beginning of the installation, and Piotr Słodkowski wrote about it. Yeah, right. He only saw 3 rooms which were incomplete, so it was a kind of a fantasy, really a reception which was not connected to the real stream of surrealism, which was to be, which went to the end. But the chairs were placed in 2 spheres there in the room, and on the right-hand side, the chairs were like asymmetrically and accidentally placed. But it was the second room, because firstly there was this lobby where was the biggest painting of Wróblewski that I shown, and simply nothing more. The emotional content of a revolution. Then there was this this room with photograms, and it was kind of the intention of Kantor was a little bit to, let's say, create this discomfort of being blocked by this, the structures. There were 5 such wedges with on the double, which the photograms were placed double-sided on it. And there was also a very small room with photographs, which I didn't show and I didn't talk about because they were more likely to be surrealistic also. And the room with models, which were, so it's possible to say where the models were placed. I showed only one photo, but it's widely impossible to reconstruct them. They were also somehow post-constructivistic a little bit and surrealistic.